The gratitude of kings is a measured thing. Commander Ava Rostova stood on the bridge of the starship Arbitrage, a vessel whose name was a promise. Below her, the planet Kalen 4 shimmered a jewel of ochre deserts and sapphire seas, its people finally breathing free air. The war was over, the liberation swift and decisive, but the cost was now being counted. Her fleet, the 12th Expeditionary, had paid in metal and blood to break the chains of the Vora Compact, a guild of mercantile predators. Now came the reckoning, not with plasma cannons, but with paragraphs of interstellar law. A signal blinked on her command throne's armrest, a summons from the victors she had just saved. Her first officer, Lieutenant Jian Li, approached his face a mask of disciplined concern. The Kalen Directorate extends its formal gratitude, Commander. They've scheduled a public address. Attendance is mandatory. Eva's eyes narrowed. The tone was off the language too precise, too binding for a simple thank you. Beside her, the holographic avatar of the fleet-mined Lyceum flickered into existence, a column of silver light humming with quiet data. The transmission's metadata carries a legal framework. Commander Lyceum stated its voice a synthesized blend of 1,000 jurists. A gratitude tithe. It appears our assistance has been invoiced. They sent us a bill for saving them. A young ensign near the comm station looked over, his face pale. He'd lost his brother in the final orbital assault. Now the very people they had fought for were presenting a demand. The air on the bridge, once thick with the relief of victory, now crackled with a new kind of tension. This was not a battlefield Eva had trained for. It was a courtroom disguised as a planet. She knew this was a test, a precedent-setting moment that would echo through the sector. The Vora were gone, but their methods, it seemed, had found fertile ground. Lyceum, Eva said, her voice dangerously calm, pull up everything you have on Vora collar doctrines. And find me a path to a public inquiry. We came here to teach freedom, not to collect a fee. The Kalen Directorate's Grand Forum was a cavernous space, its walls carved from the planet's native rose quartz. Light from the twin suns streamed through crystalline ceilings, illuminating the faces of 10,000 assembled citizens. Eva walked the long aisle, flanked by Jian and 2 stoic Marines. The weight of their gazes was heavier than any gravity well. These were people who had celebrated her fleet's arrival with tears of joy. Now their faces were a mixture of confusion, hope, and a carefully schooled neutrality. Their leaders, the Directorate Triumvirate, sat on a raised dais, their robes the color of dried blood. A civilian artisan in the crowd, a weaver named Alara, clutched a small, intricately patterned cloth she had made. She had planned to offer it as a gift to the human commander. Her workshop had been leveled in the fighting, but her family was safe. That was all that mattered. She watched the human approach the dais, a figure of stark simplicity against the ornate backdrop. She hoped the stories were true. She hoped the humans were different. Directorate Prime Kalen, a man whose smile never reached his eyes, rose to speak. His voice, amplified by the hall's acoustics, boomed with false warmth. Commander Rostova people of Kalen 4. Today we formalize our eternal gratitude to the Terran Alliance and its valiant 12th Fleet. A wave of polite applause followed. In accordance with the ancient customs of our people, and as codified in the Interstellar Gratitude Accords, we present this token of our esteem. He gestured to a massive screen that flickered to life behind him. It displayed a complex ledger, lines of debt and obligation swirling in elegant script. A debt is a chain, no matter how politely it is forged. A 10% tithe of our world's gross annual product for the next 50 standard years. Kalen announced, his voice ringing with proprietary satisfaction. A small price for freedom, a mere echo of the gratitude that fills our hearts. Ava felt Jian tense beside her. This was not a token. It was an annexation by accounting. Lyceum's voice murmured in her ear, a private channel only she could hear. The accords he cites are a Vora construct commander, designed to legitimize asset stripping post-liberation. It is legal, but only if the assisting power accepts the premise. Ava stepped forward, her boots making no sound on the polished stone. She did not look at the triumvirate. She looked at the faces in the crowd, at the weaver Alara, at the hopeful, worried eyes of a people on the precipice. Directorate Prime, she began, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmuring hall. The Terran Alliance does not trade in gratitude. We do not issue invoices for liberty. She paused, letting the words settle. We have a term for this practice. We call it extortion. The silence that followed was absolute, a perfect vacuum of shock. Kalen's smile finally faltered. Commander, you misunderstand. This is a gesture of honor. To refuse it would be a grave insult. This was the trap. Refuse their gift, and they could paint humanity as arrogant and disrespectful, undermining their influence across the sector. Accept it, and they become a new kind of master, one that smiled while fastening the chains. Eva knew the only way out was through. Then let us clarify this matter of honor, she replied, turning her gaze back to the Directorate Prime. I request a formal public inquiry here and now before these witnesses. Let us examine the nature of this gratitude you offer. Let us count the cost together in the full light of your sons. A public inquiry is a weapon that cuts both ways. Kalen hesitated, his eyes darting to his fellow directors. He could not refuse a public inquiry without appearing to have something to hide. The crowd was watching their nascent freedom hanging in the balance. He had miscalculated. He had assumed the humans, warriors fresh from a brutal campaign, would be clumsy in this arena. He had not anticipated a challenge of law, a demand for open accounting. With a tight, forced nod, he agreed. The Directorate fears no inquiry. Let the accounting begin. The Grand Forum transformed. Mobile data links and witness podiums rose from the floor. Lyceum's holographic form materialized beside Eva, its silver light a stark contrast to the warm tones of the hall. The Fleet Mind was now her counsel, its processing power a formidable legal weapon. The inquiry was not about ships or soldiers anymore. It was about the definition of help, the price of freedom, and the quiet tyranny of a well-written contract. The first witness called was a Kalen logistics officer. He testified to the vast amounts of food, water, and medical supplies the human fleet had distributed without request for payment. Lyceum projected the shipping manifests onto the main screen line by line, each one stamped with a simple declaration, gift of the Terran people. The crowd murmured. This was not the behavior of a creditor. Next, Directorate Prime, Kalen's legal counsel, a sharp-faced being named Vorlog, who had suspiciously Vora-like mannerisms, began his argument. These gifts, as you call them, create an obligation. The principle of reciprocal grace is well established. Without it, interstellar relations would crumble into charity and chaos. The tithe is merely a structured repayment for this immense material and military expenditure. He spoke with the smooth confidence of one who believed in the righteousness of the ledger. Humanity's ledgers remember gifts, not just debts. Lyceum countered, its synthesized voice patient and relentless. The principle of reciprocal grace requires prior consent and transparent terms. At no point before or during the Liberation campaign did the Terran Alliance present a schedule of costs. At no point did the Kalen people agree to indenture themselves for our assistance. The AI then displayed records of every communication between the fleet and the Kalen resistance. Not one mentioned payment. Iva watched the faces in the triumvirate. They were not evil, she realized. They were simply products of a galaxy that had taught them that nothing was free. The Vora had ruled this sector for centuries, not just with warships, but with contracts and clauses with debts passed down through generations. They had poisoned the very idea of altruism. Breaking the Vora's fleet was the easy part. Breaking their philosophy was the real war. The inquiry wore on. Witnesses from the civilian population were called. A farmer spoke of human engineers who had restored his village's water purifier, working for 3 days straight and asking only for a place to rest. Elara the weaver was called to the podium. She held up the cloth she had made. "I was going to give this to the commander," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "Not as payment, but to say thank you. A gift for a gift." The Directorate's argument began to fray. Vorlog, growing desperate, changed tactics. "The cost is not merely material. Consider the lives lost, the brave Terran soldiers who fell to liberate this world. Is a portion of your planetary output too high a price to honor their sacrifice?" This was his trump card, an appeal to emotion and guilt. A hush fell over the hall. He was weaponizing their fallen. A cold anger, sharp and clean, settled in Eva's heart. Janley stepped forward, his dress uniform immaculate, his face etched with a sorrow that was both personal and profound. He had been authorized by Eva to speak. He looked not at the Directorate, but at the crowd. "I lost 18 members of my command staff in the final orbital push. My sister was one of them." Gasps rippled through the audience. "We do not sell the blood of our fallen. We do not write invoices for their courage. Their sacrifice was not a down payment on your future. It was a statement that no one anywhere deserves to live in chains." He then turned to Vorlog, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "To suggest we would monetize their memory is the gravest insult you could possibly offer. Their names are recorded on our wall of remembrance, not in a ledger of accounts receivable." The emotional core of the Directorate's argument had just been hollowed out, exposed as a vile piece of rhetoric. Lyceum seized the opening. The Vora Compact's collar doctrine, which the gratitude tithe is a derivative of, has been condemned by the Galactic Court as a form of predatory indenture. The AI stated its voice devoid of emotion, but heavy with legal authority. It is a tool of conquest, disguised as commerce. The Directorate Prime, by invoking it, is not offering gratitude. He is attempting to perpetuate the very system of subjugation you fought to escape. The truth once spoken has a gravity all its own. The screen behind this dais shifted. Lyceum was no longer displaying shipping manifests. It was showing a live feed from orbit. The 12th Fleet, silent and waiting. Then the view changed, zooming in on the arbitrage. A series of panels on its ventral side slid open, revealing not weapons but massive broadcast arrays. The proceedings of this inquiry are being transmitted unencrypted on all standard channels, Lyceum announced. The sector is watching. Directorate Prime Kalen's face went ashen. This was no longer a local dispute. It was a public spectacle. His world's first act as a free people was being judged by 1,000 other worlds, many of them also chafing under Vora-style economic predation. He had wanted to make an example of the humans to show that even saviors had a price. Instead, Eva Rostova had made an example of him. She had turned his own forum into a mirror, and the reflection was ugly. Eva stepped forward for her closing statement. She kept it brief, her words precise. The 12th Fleet came to Kalen to sever chains, not to replace them. We do not recognize the gratitude tithe. We reject the collar doctrine and all its derivatives. We offer our friendship, our technical assistance, and our protection freely given. She then looked directly at Kalen, her eyes like chips of ice. But we demand one thing in return. The hall held its breath. Vorlog looked momentarily triumphant, as if he had caught her in a contradiction. Aha. There is a price. Yes, Eva confirmed, her voice ringing with authority. We demand you learn to be free. And freedom's first lesson is that you do not owe your liberators. You owe your children a better future. You owe yourselves the dignity of self-determination. That is the only payment we will ever accept. Then came the masterstroke, a move planned by Lyceum from the moment the inquiry was accepted. To that end, Eva continued gesturing to the main screen. We are prepared to make an investment in that future. The screen changed again. It now showed the Kalen Directorate's entire planetary debt, the crippling obligations left behind by the Vora. It was a staggering sum. Beside it, a second ledger appeared, the verified operational costs of the 12th Fleet's liberation campaign. The numbers were shockingly similar. A single keystroke can be more powerful than a fleet. Lyceum Eva commanded execute transaction. Designation mirror ledger. The AI's avatar pulsed with light. Executing. On the screen, a line of pure white light shot from the human fleet's cost ledger to the Kalen debt ledger. The Vora-held debt began to vanish line by line, cancelled out. In its place, a new entry appeared under the Terran Alliance heading. But the amount due was 0. The status beside it blinked in stark green letters, paid in full. The 12th Fleet had not just erased the Vora's military presence. It had absorbed and nullified the planet's chains of debt. The people in the Grand Forum stared stunned into silence before a single person began to clap. Then another and another, until the entire hall was filled with a thunderous rolling ovation, a sound of genuine, uncoerced gratitude that shook the very foundations of the rose quartz walls. Ilara the Weaver was openly weeping, not with sorrow, but with a joy so profound it was painful. The Directorate Triumvirate sat frozen on their dais, their power play utterly and publicly dismantled. They had tried to trap the humans in a web of legalism, and instead had been handed a lesson in economic justice that would be studied for centuries. Vorlog. The lawyer simply stared at the screen, his mouth agape. He had built his career on the unshakable premise that every action had a price, that every ledger must be balanced. The humans had balanced the ledger, but they had done it in a way he couldn't comprehend. They had paid the cost themselves. It was not commerce. It was a statement of principle written in the universal language of numbers. Eva turned to leave the dais. Her work here was done. Jian fell into step beside her. "Commander," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "That was elegant." "It was necessary, Lieutenant," she replied. Not breaking her stride. "This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Let that be the first entry in their new history." As she walked back down the long aisle, the people of Kalen 4 parted before her, not in fear or formal deference, but in genuine respect. She had won not by destroying her enemy, but by showing them a better way to live. But she knew this was just one victory. The Vora's ideology was a plague, and there were many other worlds still infected. Back on the bridge of the arbitrage, the mood was electric. The comm channels were flooded with messages from across the sector. Systems that had long suffered under similar gratitude arrangements were hailing them, asking for details for legal precedents. Eva had not just freed a planet. She had ignited a firestorm of legal and economic rebellion. The mirror ledger was no longer just a tactic. It was becoming a symbol. Sometimes the only way to win is to rewrite the rules. Lyceum's avatar appeared before her, its silver form seeming to hum with satisfaction. Commander analysis of sector-wide communications indicates a 73.4% probability that at least 5 other systems will formally challenge their Vora-instated debt obligations within the next cycle, citing the Kalen inquiry as precedent. Good Ava said, a rare, thin smile touching her lips. That's a start. But her work was not finished. The Vora Compact, though militarily weakened, was a vast economic empire. They would not take this public humiliation lying down. They would adapt. They would find new ways to exploit new legal loopholes to twist. They would come for her fleet, for the precedent she had set. The war of plasma and steel was over. The war of ink and ideas had just begun. A priority channel blinked open. It was from Alliance High Command. Eva straightened, expecting a commendation. Instead, the face of Admiral Quinn appeared, his expression grim. Eva, what have you done? The Vora ambassador is lodging a formal protest. They're accusing you of economic warfare and ideological aggression. They're demanding your recall and a full tribunal. Eva's heart sank, but she kept her composure. And what is High Command's response, Admiral? Quinn sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of galactic politics. Officially, we're reviewing the situation. Unofficially, you just kicked the biggest hornet's nest in the quadrant. The Vora have friends in the Assembly. They have leverage. This is going to get very, very messy. The transmission ended, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Jian stepped forward. A tribunal after what we did, they can't be serious. They are. Eva said, her gaze fixed on the shimmering image of Kalen 4 on the main view screen. The Vora don't fight with fleets unless they have to. They fight with influence, with political pressure, with gilded threats. They will try to isolate us to discredit the Mirror Ledger. They will try to make an example of us to show that no one defies their system and gets away with it. Lyceum's voice cut through the tension. Commander, I am detecting a significant Vora fleet mobilization on the edge of the system. They are not broadcasting hostile intent. They are taking up a customs enforcement posture. They are blockading the system. The cage was not broken, it had merely gotten larger. A blockade. A classic Vora move. It wasn't an act of war, not technically, but it was a stranglehold. It would prevent Kalen 4 from trading with anyone else, from receiving aid, from exporting the very goods they needed to rebuild. It was a siege by bureaucracy, a war of attrition designed to starve the planet into submission, to force them to accept the tithe after all. The Vora were demonstrating that they, not the Terran Alliance, controlled the economic realities of this sector. Eva stood before the view screen, her hands clasped behind her back. She had won the legal battle, the moral battle. Now the Vora were shifting the conflict to a new arena, the slow, grinding reality of supply and demand. They were telling the galaxy that while humanity might offer grand gestures, the Vora controlled the shipping lanes. They were turning Kalen 4 into a prison and daring her to break it open. A direct military confrontation would be a violation of galactic treaties, giving the Vora the casus belli they needed to declare open war. Lyceum, Eva said, her voice a low command. What are our options? Option 1. We can retreat as per High Command's implied preference, the AI stated. This would abandon Kalen 4 to the Vora's economic mercy, effectively negating our victory. Option 2. We can attempt to run the blockade, which carries a 91% chance of escalating to armed conflict, a scenario we are ordered to avoid. Option 3. We can remain in orbit, sharing our supplies with the planet, but our own resources are finite. We can only sustain this for 180 standard days. A slow death, a fast war, or a shameful retreat. It was a perfect trap. A young logistics officer working at a side console suddenly spoke up. Commander, there might be another way. All eyes turned to him. His name was Samil, a recent academy graduate, quiet and unassuming. He looked terrified to be speaking, but determined. I've been studying the Vora's own commercial code, the one they use to justify these blockades. It's a fortress of regulations, but every fortress has a key. Eva nodded for him to continue. The Vora's right to customs enforcement is contingent on the target system being a signatory to their trade pacts. Samil explained, his words coming faster as his confidence grew. Kalen 4 was a signatory under duress, but our actions at the inquiry effectively nullified all Vora-imposed contracts, including the trade pact. Legally, Kalen 4 is now an independent economic actor. Vorlag's earlier arguments had been a double-edged sword. By forcing the issue of legal contracts in the public inquiry, he had inadvertently created the very mechanism of his own system's undoing. The Vora were now blockading a sovereign system with which they had no active trade agreement. This was not customs enforcement. It was piracy. A law is only a weapon if you know how to wield it. Lyceum Verify, Eva commanded, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. The AI's light pulsed for a few seconds. The ensign's legal interpretation is flawless. It is a loophole of exquisite beauty. The Vora are currently operating in violation of their own commercial code. Eva allowed herself another thin smile. Get me a channel to the Vora flagship. It's time for another inquiry. A much shorter one. The face of Vora, Captain Yorick, appeared on the screen. He was a creature of immense size and arrogance, his face a landscape of scars and contempt. Commander Rostova, I trust you are preparing to depart. Do not interfere with official compact business. Captain Eva replied, her voice glacially polite. I am transmitting to you a copy of your own commercial code section 4, paragraph 12 regarding non-signatory systems. I am also transmitting the official minutes of the Kalen inquiry, which legally dissolved all prior agreements. By your own laws, your presence here is illegal. Your blockade is an act of piracy. Yorick's contemptuous expression wavered for a fraction of a second. He had not expected this. He was a warrior, a blunt instrument. He was here to intimidate, not to debate legal minutiae. Your interpretation is novel, Commander. Our jurists will review it. There is nothing to review, Eva said, pressing her advantage. Every moment your ships remain, you are committing a crime. And as you know, piracy carries a rather steep penalty under Galactic law. In fact, it authorizes any recognized military power to respond with appropriate force. She let that hang in the air. She was not threatening war. She was citing his own rulebook. She was offering him a legal off-ramp to avoid humiliation. The greatest victories are won without firing a shot. Yorick was trapped. If he stayed, he was a pirate, and the Terran fleet would be legally justified in blasting his ships to pieces. If he retreated, he would be admitting defeat, a defeat based on his own organization's laws. He chose the path of survival. Our jurists have provisionally accepted your interpretation pending review, he growled, the words tasting like acid. We will withdraw to the designated customs zone, but this is not overhuman. The screen went blank. On the main view screen, the Vora ships one by one turned and powered away their proud warships, effectively retreating from a legal argument. The bridge of the arbitrage erupted in cheers. Young Ensign Samil was slapped on the back, his quiet brilliance having saved them all. Eva watched the enemy fleet disappear. Yorick was right. This was far from over. She had won the battle and then the siege. But the Vora Compact was a wounded beast, and now it was personal. They would not be beaten by their own rulebook again. They would come back with new tactics, new strategies, and this time they would be aiming not just for a planet, but for the commander who had outsmarted them twice. A civilian family on Kalen 4 watched the last of the Vora ships vanish from the sky. The father, a dock worker who had seen his livelihood threatened by the blockade, hugged his daughter tightly. For the second time in as many days, the humans had given them back their future. He didn't know the complex legal maneuvers that had taken place in orbit. He only knew that the sky was clear and his world was still free. He made a quiet promise to himself to teach his daughter what gratitude really meant. It wasn't a debt to be paid, but a light to be passed on. Eva knew that the personal cost of this victory would be high. Admiral Quinn's warning echoed in her mind. A tribunal was still a very real possibility. She had defied the spirit, if not the letter of her orders, to de-escalate. She had provoked a major galactic power and exposed their entire business model as a sham. High Command would be under immense political pressure to sacrifice her to appease the Vora and their allies. She may have saved Kalen IV, but she may have just ended her career. True leadership is about the next battle, not the last one. Lyceum, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Begin compiling a complete legal defense. Log every communication, every action, every citation. We won here by the law. We will win at home the same way. The AI's avatar glowed softly. It is already done, Commander. The file is designated the Kalen Precedent. It contains the full record of our actions, as well as a predictive analysis of the Vora's likely legal and political counter-moves. And what is the top-line prediction? Gian asked, his earlier elation giving way to a new apprehension. The Vora will not challenge the legality of the Mirror Ledger or the blockade withdrawal directly, Lyceum stated. To do so would be to admit the flaws in their own legal framework. Instead, they will seek to isolate and punish the architect of their defeat. They will paint Commander Rostova as a rogue agent, a dangerous radical who upsets the delicate balance of galactic commerce. They will not attack her actions. They will attack her. The path ahead was clear. Ava's next fight would not be for a planet, but for her own reputation, her career, and the very principle she had established. The courtroom would be a military tribunal, the accusers her own superiors prodded into action by a shadowy corporate empire. She would be alone. Let them come, Eva said, turning away from the view screen and facing her crew. We knew the risks when we came to this sector. We knew what the Vora were. We did the right thing. Whatever comes next, we will face it with the same integrity. We will teach by numbers. We will be remembered by ledgers. Let that be our shield and our sword. The crew looked back at her, their faces filled with a fierce loyalty. They had followed her into battle. They would follow her into a courtroom, too. The cost of victory was often another harder fight, and Ava Rostova had never backed down from a fight in her life. The Vora's first move was insidious. It did not come from a warship, but from a news feed. A sector-wide broadcast, sponsored by a dozen front corporations, began running stories about Kalen IV. They painted the planet not as a victim, but as a failed state collapsing into chaos, without the Vora's stabilizing influence. They showed carefully edited footage of street brawls and economic hardship, all subtly blamed on the humans' reckless intervention. It was a campaign of disinformation designed to poison the well, to turn public opinion against her before any tribunal could even be convened. Gian brought the reports to her, his fists clenched. They're lying. They're twisting everything. Of course they are, Ava said calmly, scrolling through the data on her private screen. This isn't a fight for the truth anymore. It's a fight for the narrative. They want to make the Kalen Precedent a cautionary tale, not an inspiration. Truth is the first casualty of a war of ideas. She knew she couldn't combat the lies on the same channel. The Vora owned the media landscape in this sector. She needed a different kind of weapon. She needed a truth so powerful, so undeniable, that it would cut through the noise and expose the lie for what it was. Lyceum, she said. The Mirror Ledger. We showed Kalen IV their debt being paid. Can we show the rest of the galaxy who they were paying? The AI's avatar flickered. The Vora's financial structures are notoriously opaque, Commander. A web of shell corporations and anonymous holding companies. It is difficult. Difficult is not impossible, Iva countered. You have the complete Vora commercial code. You have their debt instruments from the Kalen Ledger. There will be a trail. Find it. Find the names at the top. Find the ones who get rich from this misery. Put their names on a public ledger for all to see. It was an audacious gamble. She would be using the Vora's own tactics against them, transparency as a weapon. For the next 3 days, the arbitrage hung silent in orbit, its crew going about their duties, while their fleet mind engaged in a deep clandestine war in the digital ether. Lyceum, a being of pure logic, and Data dove into the murky underworld of galactic finance, following faint traces of transactions, decrypting ancient ledgers and piecing together a puzzle that had been deliberately shattered into a million pieces. A civilian data clerk on a Vora-controlled trade station noticed the odd energy signatures. He saw faint ghost-like inquiries pinging off their deepest, most secure servers. He was a small man in a big system, a cog in a machine he never fully understood. He had a family. He knew better than to report anomalies that might draw unwanted attention. He deleted the logs, took a sip of his nutrient paste, and went back to processing shipping manifests. His quiet act of self-preservation was the final key Lyceum needed to bypass the Vora's last firewall. Then it was ready. Eva opened a fleet-wide channel, but she also patched it into the same emergency frequencies used to broadcast the inquiry. She was about to hold a new kind of public hearing. Her face appeared on screens across the system, calm and resolute. "I am Commander Eva Rostova of the Terran starship Arbitrage. For days, the Vora Compact has been telling you a story about chaos on Kalen 4. Now I will tell you a different story, a story about where your money goes." Behind her, the main view screen of the bridge lit up. It showed a simple, elegant pyramid structure. At the bottom were the names of a dozen worlds, Kalen 4 among them all, shackled by gratitude tithes. Lines of energy representing their wealth flowed upwards. The lines converged on a series of anonymous corporations. The ledger tells the story the victor does not want told. The Vora tell you your tithes pay for stability and protection. Eva continued, her voice steady. But the money doesn't stop at the compact. It flows through it. On the screen, Lyceum's data trail animated, showing the wealth continuing its journey upward through layers of legal firewalls and shell companies. And then it reached the top. The pyramid's capstone. It was not the Vora Compact. It was 3 names. 3 individuals, respected members of the Galactic Assembly, pillars of the interstellar community. Their faces appeared on the screen next to the staggering sums of money that flowed secretly into their private accounts. One of them was the very assembly member who was leading the call for Eva's tribunal. The silence that followed the broadcast was deafening. Eva had not just exposed a corporation's greed. She had exposed the corruption at the heart of the galaxy's governing body. She had taken the Vora's secret weapon, their political influence, and turned it into their greatest liability. The Vora's propaganda campaign vanished overnight. The news feeds were now dominated by a single explosive story. The 3 assembly members issued furious denials, but the data was irrefutable. Lyceum's digital audit was perfect, its sourcing impeccable. The Vora had been cut off at the head. Their political patrons were now fighting for their own survival, scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. High Command sent a single terse message to Eva. "Proceed with your mission. Further instructions pending." The tribunal was for the moment dead. She had won, again. But this victory felt different. It was colder, sharper. She had not just defeated an enemy. She had humiliated them, exposed their deepest secrets to the galaxy. The cost of this victory was not a reprimand or a lost career. It was the undying personal hatred of some of the most powerful and ruthless individuals in the galaxy. Jan stood beside her on the bridge, looking at the names still displayed on the screen. "They will never forgive you for this." "I know," Eva said, her gaze distant. But this was never about forgiveness. It was about justice. And justice, unlike gratitude, is not negotiable. She had started a revolution not of planets, but of balance sheets. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the final accounting was yet to come. The Vora would not send a fleet or a lawyer next time. They would send an assassin. A ghost cannot be shot. The threat of an assassin changed the air on the arbitrage. Every shadow seemed a little longer. Every unexpected sound on the comms a little sharper. Lyceum dedicated a full 10% of its processing power to threat assessment, modeling thousands of potential attack vectors, from micro-drones in the ventilation system to kinetic strikes from rogue asteroids. But the true enemy wasn't a ship or a weapon. It was an idea planted in the mind of a single unknown individual. Ava Rostova, for all the power she commanded, had become a target of one. She felt the eyes of her crew on her, a mixture of concern and a new, harder loyalty. They were her honor guard now, in a war with no front lines. They won't come from outside, she told Jian as they reviewed security protocols in her ready room. The ship was a fortress, virtually unassailable. The Vora are too smart for that. They will use the board, not try to sweep the pieces off it. They will use someone already here. Jian's face was grim. That means anyone. Any Kalen official, any civilian contractor, any one of the thousands of people we just liberated. The trust they had worked so hard to build had just become a potential vulnerability. The very people they had saved were now a sea of possible threats. This was the Vora's true poison. It didn't just kill bodies. It murdered trust. You cannot see the weapon when it is disguised as a handshake. On the ochre plains of Kalen 4, a farmer named Ren tended his vapor condensers. He was the man who had spoken at the inquiry, his simple testimony about the human engineers, a powerful moment of truth. His life was returning to a quiet rhythm. His children were safe. He owed the humans a debt he could never repay. That evening, 2 men visited his small moisture farm. They were not Kalen. Their clothes were too fine, their smiles too thin. They did not threaten him. They simply showed him a tablet displaying the location of his sister's family on a distant trading hub. A hub owned and operated by a Vora subsidiary. They didn't ask for much. Just his help placing a small decorative marker at the upcoming Unity Festival. A gesture of goodwill, they said. A ceremonial foundation stone for a new trade embassy. Ren knew it was a lie. He felt a cold dread settle in his gut, a fear more profound than anything he had felt during the Vora's occupation. The chains he thought had been broken were simply being reforged, this time around his heart. The Unity Festival was meant to be the capstone of the humans' victory, a planet-wide celebration of freedom and a formal cementing of the new alliance between Kalen 4 and the Terran Federation. Eva was scheduled to give the keynote address alongside the Directorate Triumvirate. It was a moment of maximum public exposure, a perfect stage for an assassination. The security profile was a nightmare. 1 million celebrants, open skies, and a guest of honor who refused to hide in a bunker. To do so would be to admit they've won, Ava stated, overriding Jian's objections. It would show the Kalen people that we are afraid. Fear is the Vora's currency. We will not trade in it. Lyceum's silver avatar shimmered beside the tactical display. Commander, my analysis suggests a 98.6% probability that any assassination attempt will be designed to achieve more than your death. It will be engineered to create political fallout, to frame the Directorate, or to cast our presence here as a destabilizing force. The act will be a message. A message written in blood carries far. It was Ensign Samil who found the anomaly. The quiet genius of the blockade stared at his console, a deep frown on his face. Commander, I'm seeing something strange. Faint energy readings from the planetary power grid. They're too structured for normal fluctuations. It's not a weapon signature. It's data. Very dense, very complex data hidden inside the power relays. Eva and Jian joined him. On the screen, Samil isolated the signal. It was a ghost, a whisper in the machine. Lyceum Eva ordered analyze. The AI was silent for a full minute, its avatar's light strobing as it cross-referenced the signal against every known data format. Curious Lyceum finally said, "It is not a program. It is a document. A legally binding contract weaponized. It's a Vora ownership claim coded to activate via a proximity trigger, specifically a claim on all planetary infrastructure defaulting to them in the event of a leadership decapitation of the current ruling body." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The trap was not a bomb. It was a pen. The Vora were not trying to kill Eva and the Directorate. They were trying to create a legal power vacuum. The moment Eva and the Triumvirate were killed, the beacon Ren was being forced to plant would activate. The encoded contract would execute, and by their own twisted laws, ownership of Kalen 4's entire infrastructure would revert to the Vora Compact. They wouldn't have to fire a shot. They would reconquer the planet with a paragraph. It was a legal coup d'etat with murder as the triggering clause. Death is a distraction. The real crime is in the fine print. They're planning to assassinate the entire leadership, including me, and use that chaos to legally seize the planet. Eva breathed a cold fury washing over her. This was the Vora's masterpiece, an act of terrorism that wore the mask of a corporate merger. They made us look for a killer with a gun while they were sending a notary with a knife. They had less than 12 hours until the festival. A frontal assault was out of the question. The conspirators, whoever they were, would be hidden in the crowds. They needed to find the beacon, the physical trigger, and they needed to find the farmer who was being forced to carry it. Lyceum began a frantic scan correlating the ghost signal with planetary surveillance trying to triangulate the beacon's location. The search narrowed to the Grand Plaza, the site of the festival. Tens of thousands of people were already gathering. It was a search for one terrified man in a crowd of 1,000,000. Eva made a decision. Jian, you coordinate orbital overwatch. Lock down the plaza exits the second we have a positive ID. Samil, stay with Lyceum. Feed me everything you find. I'm going down there. Commander, that's insane, Jian protested. You'll be the primary target. I'm the only one who knows what this farmer is feeling, Eva countered. He's not a villain. He's a victim. I can't send a security team and guns raised. That will only trigger the panic the Vora are counting on. I have to do this myself. She put on a simple civilian cloak over her uniform, a hood pulled low. Her only weapon was a small sidearm and a direct private comm link to Lyceum. She was hunting a legal document in a sea of faces, and the fate of a world depended on her finding it before the shooting started. The Grand Plaza was a kaleidoscope of color and sound. Banners of ochre and sapphire fluttered in the breeze. The air smelled of roasted kef nuts and sweet Kalen wine. Children laughed and chased each other through the crowds. It was a picture of the peace she had fought for, a peace that was now balanced on a razor's edge. Eva moved through the throng, her senses on high alert. Lyceum's voice was a calm presence in her ear, feeding her probabilities, highlighting faces in the crowd that registered elevated heart rates or stress pheromones. It was an ocean of false positives. A law is a promise. A threat is also a promise. Lyceum's voice sharpened. Commander, I have isolated a repeating energy signature from the beacon. It is low power, designed to avoid detection. I am triangulating. Proceed to Sector Gamma 7 near the Fountain of the Twin Suns. Eva moved her steps, purposeful but unhurried. The fountain was a massive sculpture of flowing water and carved stone, a popular meeting place. And there, standing by its edge, looking lost and pale, was Ren the farmer. He clutched a small, ornate box. The beacon. His eyes darted around, filled with a desperate, hunted look. He was a good man, being forced to do a terrible thing. As Eva approached, she saw two other figures detaching themselves from the crowd. They were moving to intercept Ren. Vora agents, she realized. They were here to make sure their pawn played his part. She had only seconds to act. She couldn't risk a firefight. Not here. Not with so many civilians. She stepped in front of Ren, blocking the agent's path. She kept her hood low. "They're threatening your sister, aren't they?" she said, her voice quiet. Ren's eyes widened in shock and terror. He nodded, unable to speak. "Give me the box, Ren," she said gently. "Let us help you." One of the Vora agents saw the exchange. His eyes narrowed. He reached into his coat. He was going for a weapon. But before he could draw, Jian's voice crackled in Eva's ear. "Orbital Overwatch has them. Non-lethal sedative darts. On your mark," Mark Eva whispered. From an impossible height, two tiny silent projectiles streaked through the atmosphere, guided by Lyceum's perfect calculations. The two Vora agents stiffened their eyes, glazing over, and then crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The crowd busy with the festival barely noticed. Kalen security, guided by Jian, moved in quietly to retrieve them. The immediate threat was neutralized. Ren stared at Eva, then at the unconscious agents, his face a mask of disbelief. He held out the box with trembling hands. Eva took it. Inside was a small, intricately carved stone. The Vora contractual landmine. It looked like a piece of art. It was in its own way. A masterpiece of malevolent law. Sometimes justice isn't a verdict. It's a choice. It's not over. Eva told Ren, her voice still quiet, but now hard as steel. "They'll have a kill team in the crowd. Their plan has failed, so they'll revert to simple murder. They still want me and the Directorate dead." She looked into his eyes. "You can run and we will protect you. Or you can help me finish this." A flicker of something new appeared in the farmer's eyes. The fear was still there, but it was being eclipsed by a slow-burning anger. He had been used. His world had been threatened. His family had been turned into a weapon against him. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. It was pure Eva Rostova. She would not hide. She would not cancel the ceremony. She would walk onto the stage and use the Vora's own weapon against them. "Lyceum," she said into her calm. "The beacon, can you rewrite it?" "I cannot alter the core Vora code without triggering its anti-tamper protocols," the AI replied. "However, I can encapsulate it. I can wrap it in a new layer of code, a Terran legal framework. When activated, the Vora claim will execute, but it will do so inside a digital legal simulation which I control. It will be a trap inside a trap. A mirror does not just reflect, it contains." Eva walked onto the festival stage, the Directorate Triumvirate at her side. She could feel the scopes of the Vora kill team tracking her. In her hand, she held the beacon. Ren the farmer stood in the front row of the crowd, watching her, his face a mixture of terror and resolve. Eva began her speech, her voice calm and clear, broadcast across the planet. She spoke of courage, of freedom, of the price of liberty. Then she held up the beacon. "The Vora Compact has offered a gift to mark this occasion," she announced, her voice ringing with irony. "A foundation stone for our new relationship." She placed it on the podium. "I accept this token on behalf of all free peoples." This was the trigger phrase. In a hidden location across the plaza, the Vora sniper team leader gave the order. She's activated it. Fire. But before the assassins could pull their triggers, every screen in the plaza, every tablet, every public display flickered to life. Lyceum had seized the planetary network. The screens showed the Vora beacon, but it was now trapped inside a shimmering blue grid of Terran legal code. and then Lyceum executed the Vora's contract. The entire sector watched in real time as the Vora's pre-written legal claim tried to seize Kalen 4's infrastructure. But at every step, it was met by Lyceum's countermeasures. When the Vora code cited leadership decapitation, Lyceum presented live biometric data showing Ava and the Directorate were alive. When the code cited Kalen's old coerced trade agreements, Lyceum displayed the legally notarized minutes of the public inquiry that had nullified them. It was a public vivisection of a legal document. The Vora's weapon was being dismantled line by line, clause by clause, in front of a live audience of billions. It was a corridor of law from which there was no escape. The Vora assassins, watching their screens in horror, saw their entire mission not just fail, but become a public spectacle of their own criminality. Their locations, pinpointed by their network access, were suddenly displayed on the main screen for Kalen's security to see. Their escape routes were gone. In the ensuing panic, one of the Vora snipers, a zealot loyal to the old ways, fired a single, desperate shot at the stage. It wasn't aimed at Eva. It was aimed at the Directorate Prime. Chaos. But Jian Li, who had come to the surface against Ava's orders, moved faster than anyone thought possible. He threw himself in front of the director, taking the plasma bolt high in his shoulder. He crumpled to the ground, his uniform smoking, a stark look of surprise on his face. The cost of victory had arrived, paid in his flesh and blood. The Vora agents were captured. The plot was foiled. Jian would survive, but his arm would be useless for months. The scars would remain forever. The victory felt hollowed out by the near tragedy. But it was a victory nonetheless. The Vora's plot, their ultimate legal gambit, had been turned into the ultimate proof of their corruption. They had been caught red-handed attempting assassination and conquest by contract. They had no allies left, no political cover. Back on the arbitrage, Eva stood by Jian's bedside in the medical bay. He was pale but awake. "Should have let me handle security, Commander." He rasped, a weak smile on his face. "You did, Lieutenant," she said softly. "You did." She felt a profound sense of responsibility. This was the cost, she realized. Not just the physical wound to her friend, but the knowledge that her path, her methods, would always put the people she cared about in harm's way. The only thing more expensive than freedom is the fight to keep it. Lyceum appeared as a small hollow emitter by the bed. "Commander, the Kalen precedent is now unassailable. The Vora Compact has been formally censured by the Galactic Assembly. Their trading privileges in this sector have been revoked. They are broken." But Eva knew it wasn't enough. The Vora were an idea. Another would rise in their place. To win, they had to build something better. "Lyceum," she commanded, her voice filled with a new, unshakable resolve. "Draft a new interstellar agreement. Call it the Aurora Accords. Simple, transparent trade. Mutual defense. All disputes settled by an incorruptible arbiter." "An AI," Lyceum stated. "Me." "You," Eva confirmed. "We will offer it to every independent system in this sector. We will replace the Vora's web of lies with a network of trust. We will not just defeat them, we will make them obsolete." The bridge of the arbitrage became the galaxy's first mobile courtroom, a beacon of a new kind of law. Eva sent the Aurora Accords to every system that had ever suffered under the Vora. "It was a simple offer trade with us, and the ledger will be open for all to see. There will be no secret clauses, no hidden tithes. A new public ledger was created, visible to anyone with a comm signal." The first signatory was Kalen 4. Then another system, then 3 more. A cascade began. Systems that had been afraid to act alone now saw a path to collective security and prosperity. The star chart on this arbitrage's main view screen was a living testament to their victory. Dozens of systems, once colored Vora red, were blinking one by one to a bright Terran blue. The Vora's economic empire was evaporating in real time, not from bombs, but from breach of contract on a galactic scale. The precedent was locked. The method was not just defeated, it was supplanted. Eva stood before the view screen, watching the blue lights spread like a dawn. Gian, his arm in a regenerative cast, stood beside her. He would heal. They all would. The cost had been high, but the price of failure would have been immeasurable. The court beacon on the ship's hull, the transmitter for the new legal framework, pulsed with a steady cooling light, its work for the day done. This is how you win a war that matters. You don't burn down your enemy's house. You build a better one next door and invite everyone to move in. You teach them a new way to count, a new way to trust. The gratitude of kings may be a measured thing, but the justice of a true and open ledger is absolute. And it is a lesson that humanity was uniquely suited to teach the stars. We came not to conquer, but to convince.